this new team?
Yeah, I feel pretty good. I'm still getting used to playing with my new teammates, but for the most part, it's just basketball, universal sport, so pretty cool.
Is it different though in that
Everybody saw the hits, the blindside shoves, the elbows thrown in the paint, and the outright disrespect broadcast on national television night after night. When Caitlin Clark stepped onto the professional hardwood, she wasn't just walking into a new basketball league, she was walking into a target-rich environment where veteran players had seemingly made a silent pact to break her down. You could see it in the smirks after a hard foul, and hear it in the passive-aggressive press conferences that followed every single game. The media tried to spin it as standard rookie hazing, telling fans to calm down and claiming this was just how the professional game was played at the highest level. But anyone with eyes could see the reality was far more sinister. And it wasn't just basketball anymore, it had become deeply personal. For months, millions of new viewers screamed at their televisions, begging for someone, anyone, to step up and protect the ultimate golden goose of women's basketball. The franchise was watching their million-dollar investment get battered from pillar to post, and the referees were magically swallowing their whistles every time number 22 hit the deck. The situation was rapidly reaching a boiling point, and rumors started swirling that Indiana was frantically hunting for a permanent solution behind closed doors. They didn't need another perimeter shooter or a flashy ball handler, they needed a human weapon. They needed someone who thrived in the mud. Someone who took zero disrespect and struck absolute, paralyzing fear into the hearts of the opposition. They needed a traditional, old-school bodyguard. And what happened next would completely flip the entire league upside down. But to truly understand why this warning message was so desperately needed, we have to look back at the absolute gauntlet Clark was forced to run during her opening months as a professional. We aren't just talking about tough screens or aggressive closeouts. We are talking about highly calculated plays that almost ended in tragic, career-halting injuries. Take the infamous hip check that sent her violently sprawling across the hardwood before the ball was even in bounds. The opposing player responsible walked away running her mouth, utterly unbothered, knowing full well the league office wasn't going to hand down any meaningful punishment. This wasn't an isolated incident either. It was part of a clear, orchestrated pattern of physical intimidation designed to test her mental breaking point. Veterans were intentionally stepping on her feet during dead balls, throwing shoulder checks during routine rotations, and utilizing every dirty trick in the veteran playbook to make her life a living hell. The unwritten rules of basketball dictate that rookies must earn their stripes, but the level of aggression directed at this specific rookie was entirely unprecedented in the history of the sport. Referees seemed almost complicit at times, ignoring blatant, flagrant fouls and allowing games to devolve into street fights. The front office of the Fever watched in absolute horror as their franchise cornerstone was subjected to a nightly physical assault, realizing that pure offensive talent meant absolutely nothing if their star player was constantly picking herself up off the floor. The breaking point had finally been reached, and the realization washed over the organization that a massive philosophical change was urgently required. But the roots of this hostility went much deeper than just on-court competition. The harsh reality is that this unprecedented level of physical targeting was born out of a deep-seated, intensely bitter financial jealousy that had been brewing in the locker rooms long before Clark even played her first professional minute. You have to put yourself in the shoes of a veteran player who has been grinding in the league for a decade, flying commercial, playing in half-empty arenas, and making a modest five-figure base salary. Suddenly, a 22-year-old college phenomenon arrives, and the entire economic landscape of the sport shifts overnight. Charter flights are instantly mandated, arenas are sold out across the country, and unprecedented media coverage dominates the daily sports cycle. But the tipping point wasn't just the ticket sales, it was the staggering, record-breaking endorsement deals. When news broke that Clark had secured a massive, multi-million-dollar signature shoe contract before even taking a professional shot, the underground resentment completely boiled over. Veteran stars who had won multiple championships and MVPs felt incredibly slighted, believing they had paved the way only to watch a rookie reap all the unprecedented financial rewards. This off-court economic disparity translated directly into on-court violence, turning every single defensive possession into an opportunity for established players to physically vent their deeply rooted financial frustrations. They couldn't touch her bank account, so they decided to test her physical durability instead. The media tried to carefully disguise this jealousy as competitive fire, but the forced smiles and thinly veiled comments during post-game interviews revealed the undeniable truth. The animosity was palpable, and it set the stage for one of the most controversial decisions in the history of women's sports. The true depth of the league-wide conspiracy against the rookie was finally unveiled during the highly controversial Olympic selection process, which shocked fans and analysts alike. Despite being the biggest draw in the history of the sport, leading the league in multiple statistical categories, and single-handedly revitalizing the entire women's basketball brand, Clark was noticeably left off the national team roster. The official explanation cited a lack of professional experience and the necessity of fielding a veteran-heavy squad, but the underground rumors painted a much darker, highly political picture. Speculation ran absolutely rampant that influential veteran players had essentially drawn a line in the sand, subtly threatening to disrupt team chemistry or even boycott the games entirely if the rookie was handed a spot on the roster. It was the ultimate power play, a coordinated effort by the old guard to remind the new face of the league exactly who was still in charge behind closed doors. This blatant Olympic snub wasn't just a simple roster decision. It was a massive, highly public message meant to humble the rising star and put her in her place. But instead of breaking her spirit, this calculated exclusion only fueled the fire, proving to the entire world that the establishment was genuinely terrified of her rapid ascent. The sheer level of gatekeeping was astonishing, exposing the deep fractures within the sports culture and highlighting the desperate lengths the old guard would go to maintain their fragile grip on power. However, this off-court political maneuvering only amplified the desperate need for on-court protection, leading directly to the Fever's front office making their ultimate, highly anticipated counter-move. The realization hit the Indiana front office like a ton of bricks. Their current roster simply wasn't constructed for a grueling, season-long street fight. While they had incredible foundational pieces, incredibly skilled bigs, and lightning-fast guards, they lacked the one crucial element necessary to survive in a hostile environment: a true, unapologetic enforcer. Basketball history is littered with examples of transcendent talents requiring a physical bodyguard to do the dirty work in the trenches. Michael Jordan had Charles Oakley to clear the paint. Wayne Gretzky had Marty McSorley to make opponents pay for cheap shots. And Steph Curry relied heavily on Draymond Green to establish a physical boundary that nobody dared to cross. The Fever desperately needed their own version of an enforcer, someone who possessed the sheer physical strength, the intimidating presence, and the absolute fearlessness required to dramatically alter the spatial dynamics of the court. When an elite bodyguard is on the floor, the paint instantly transforms from a free-for-all into a highly restricted, heavily guarded area. Opposing players suddenly think twice about throwing a stray elbow or leaving their foot under a jump shooter, knowing that any cheap shot will be met with immediate, ruthless, and physically punishing retaliation. The front office knew that if they didn't quickly address this glaring weakness, they were basically committing professional malpractice, leaving their billion-dollar asset completely exposed to the wolves. The search for the ultimate equalizer began, and the rumors of a massive, culture-shifting acquisition started circulating through the league's deeply connected underground networks. The time for playing nice had officially come to an end. The warning message didn't arrive quietly. It echoed violently through the locker rooms, practice facilities, and media scrums across the entire country, when the Hines-Allen narrative officially exploded onto the scene. For weeks, intense speculations had been brewing about secret meetings, urgent front office maneuvers, and a desperate desire to inject pure, unadulterated toughness into the Indiana lineup. The WNBA is an incredibly small, tightly knit community where secrets rarely stay hidden for long, and the whispers regarding a major philosophical shift were getting louder by the day. When you bring a player with the sheer physical dominance, the unapologetic aggression, and the elite rebounding prowess of a Hines-Allen archetype into the mix, you aren't just adding a player to your roster, you are fundamentally changing the entire identity of your franchise. The message sent to the rest of the league was unmistakable, heavily bolded, and permanently underlined. The era of getting free, consequence-free shots on number 22 was officially over, permanently closed for business. If any opposing player wanted to test the rookie moving forward, they were going to have to physically go through a relentless, punishing brick wall to do it. This monumental shift wasn't just about playing tougher defense or grabbing a few extra rebounds. It was about establishing a permanent physical boundary that no opponent would ever dare cross without expecting immediate, severe retaliation. The dynamic completely altered the psychological warfare of the game, forcing the established veterans to completely rethink their aggressive strategies. And what happened next would send absolute shockwaves through the very foundation of the sport. When the reality of this newly established bodyguard dynamic finally materialized on the hardwood, it sent an immediate, paralyzing panic through the established veteran cliques who had grown entirely too comfortable with their bullying tactics. The players who had previously been padding their defensive highlight reels with cheap, unwarranted shots suddenly realized that the fundamental rules of engagement had been completely rewritten overnight. You could literally see the hesitation in their eyes during the very first quarter of action. Players who used to boldly step into Clark's landing space were suddenly pulling back, constantly looking over their shoulders to see where the enforcer was positioned on the floor. The psychological impact was absolutely massive, instantly relieving the immense physical pressure that had been slowly crushing the rookie for months. It wasn't just about the physical hits being deterred. It was about the newly found mental freedom that allowed the young star to finally play her game without the constant, draining fear of a season-ending cheap shot. The whispers in the opposing locker rooms quickly shifted from arrogant plotting to genuine concern, as coaches frantically tried to adjust their defensive schemes to account for this newly introduced element of extreme physical danger. The established hierarchy of the league was crumbling right before their eyes, and the veterans who had spent the entire summer trying to break the rookie's spirit were suddenly the ones being forced to retreat. The balance of power had violently shifted, but the long-term consequences of this dramatic escalation were still waiting to be fully realized. This sudden influx of protective physicality essentially forced the entire league office to carefully reevaluate their notoriously lenient stance on hard fouls and aggressive defensive tactics. For months, the league had seemingly turned a blind eye to the targeted harassment, happily reaping the benefits of the massive television ratings, while ignoring the incredibly dangerous environment they were actively cultivating. But the arrival of a true enforcer meant that the potential for an all-out, nationally televised brawl had skyrocketed astronomically. The referees, who had previously swallowed their whistles and allowed the veterans to dictate the physical tone, were suddenly forced to take back control of the games before things escalated into completely unmanageable territory. The presence of a bodyguard wasn't just protecting a single player, it was forcing the entire sport to finally professionalize its officiating standards and crack down on the dirty, underground tactics that had plagued the game for years. The league was terrified of a catastrophic public relations nightmare, knowing that if the newly acquired enforcer was forced to take matters into their own hands, the resulting fallout would dominate the mainstream news cycle for all the wrong reasons. This behind-the-scenes panic forced a massive, league-wide memo demanding stricter enforcement of the rules, ultimately benefiting every single player on the court, not just the heavily targeted rookie. The enforcer had single-handedly cleaned up the league's dirty underbelly simply by existing on the roster, proving that sometimes the threat of extreme violence is the only way to achieve actual peace on the basketball court. But the story was far from over. Looking ahead to the incredibly highly anticipated upcoming season, the entire landscape of the sport has been permanently and irreversibly altered by this single, franchise-defining decision to embrace the enforcer mentality. The explosive matchups on the horizon are no longer just about offensive firepower or tactical coaching adjustments. They are heavily anticipated heavyweight prize fights, where the physical boundaries will be constantly tested. The veteran cliques who orchestrated the initial wave of hostility are now staring down the barrel of a completely new era, one where their traditional intimidation tactics are entirely obsolete and inherently dangerous to their own physical well-being. The unbelievable financial growth of the league, driven entirely by the very player they attempted to destroy, has only raised the stakes even higher, making every single nationally televised game an absolute must-watch event. The introduction of the bodyguard archetype has fundamentally changed the culture of the locker room, instilling a deep sense of swagger, unshakable confidence, and collective unity that had been desperately missing during the turbulent opening months. The young superstar can finally focus entirely on shattering the remaining record books, knowing with absolute certainty that she has an incredibly loyal, fiercely protective force watching her back at all times. The shift in power is absolutely undeniable, and the entire league is being forced to adapt to this new, highly physical reality or risk being completely left behind in the dust. The days of silent pacts and coordinated bullying are officially dead and buried. Ultimately, the warning message sent by the arrival of the Ultimate Enforcer goes far beyond just a single basketball season or a specific roster move. It represents a massive, undeniable paradigm shift in the evolution of professional women's sports. It highlights the incredibly dark, deeply complicated reality of what happens when unprecedented fame, massive financial disruption, and deeply rooted veteran jealousy all collide on the exact same basketball court. The intense, highly publicized struggle for survival forced a young franchise to completely abandon their traditional rebuilding strategy and embrace a ruthless, old-school mentality that forever changed the trajectory of the league. Viewers are left to seriously question just how far the established old guard was truly willing to go to protect their fragile legacies, and whether the league office ever actually cared about player safety in the first place, or if they were just heavily profiting off the highly dramatic controversy. As the newly protected superstar continues her inevitable, unstoppable march towards absolute greatness, the rest of the league must painfully accept that their window to intimidate her has permanently slammed shut. The ultimate cost of greatness is always conflict, but when you finally bring the right bodyguard into the fight, the entire narrative violently flips in your favor. The Wnba will truly never be the same again, and the message has been clearly received by everyone who dared to stand in the way. Everybody saw the hits, the blindside shoves, the elbows thrown in the paint, and the outright disrespect broadcast on national television night after night. When Caitlin Clark stepped onto the professional hardwood, she wasn't just walking into a new basketball league, she was walking into a target-rich environment where veteran players had seemingly made a silent pact to break her down. You could see it in the smirks after a hard foul, and hear it in the passive-aggressive press conferences that followed every single game. The media tried to spin it as standard rookie hazing, telling fans to calm down and claiming this was just how the professional game was played at the highest level. But anyone with eyes could see the reality was far more sinister. And it wasn't just basketball anymore, it had become deeply personal. For months, millions of new viewers screamed at their televisions, begging for someone, anyone, to step up and protect the ultimate golden goose of women's basketball. The franchise was watching their $1 million investment get battered from pillar to